Welcome to Technically, the webinar series dedicated to discussing the technical challenges of making the web accessible. This month, our presenter is Nic Steenhout, host of the popular Accessibility Rules podcast. And now, our host and moderator, Karl Groves.
All right, everybody. This is Karl Groves from Tenon. This is our first technically webinar, and I think it's really interesting to note who we have with us is Nic Steenhout, and Nic and I have known each other for a while. The idea for Technically came about from from Job van Achterberg, who can't be with us. He's actually at Frontiers today. He's on the Frontiers committee. And we came up with this idea. Actually, Job came up with the idea and I sort of ran with it, but came up with the idea of there's a lot of conferences out there. There's a lot of meetups and all that sort of thing. And a lot of the discussions are sort of introductory in nature, and there's lots of reasons why they're introductory in nature, and that's because a lot of people need the introductory stuff. They need that. They need the introductions. But the idea that we had was we want to dive into more discussions around the technologies and more discussions around making sure that the information is directly actionable. And so this is the first one of these. We're going to have these every month. So if anybody has anything to share that they'd like to talk about accessibility, and they want to get into the weeds a little bit, then this is going to be a good format for you. So without further ado, though, I'm going to introduce Nic, and Nic is going to take over and drive the discussion here around podcast accessibility and a lot of the things that you have to consider, including new WCAG success criteria and things like that. So here we go. Here's Nic.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be the first guinea pig to give this series of webinar, but I'm even more excited to talk about podcast accessibility. It's been a pet peeve of mine that there's so many great podcasts out there, but so few of them are accessible or providing even basic accessibility. So anyway, let's get started. Before I share my screen, I should say a couple things of housekeeping. The first is that we're going to take questions, but if you can send them through the Zoom interface, and we'll kind of pile them up at the end rather than interrupt the flow, because in this format it's a bit difficult. And the other thing is that for people with vision disabilities, the slides don't really have visuals. It's just mostly text to help you to help sighted people to follow along. So you're not going to miss anything from my slides that I'm not going to be describing because it's text. So with that, I'm going to share my screen for a second. Let's see, start broadcast. All right, so I'm sharing the screen. Accessible podcasts, so that's what we're talking about. If you're not here to hear about accessible podcasts, well, stay anyway, because it's going to be super interesting. I think many of you know me, but in case you don't know me, I'm easily found on Twitter at Vavroom. That's VAVROOM. I work for Nobility, a nonprofit based in Austin, Texas, and we do accessibility. That's what we do all the time. I have a personal blog site at incl.ca, and of course, I have my podcast website at a11yrules.com. I also, a few months ago, put together a site about podcast accessibility. So there's a lot of resource there and information that kind of follow with what I'll be talking about today on podcast accessibility website. So, quick overview. There's a few things to consider when we're talking about podcast accessibility. The first thing is that we have to provide transcripts. The other thing is that our website need to be accessible. And a big aspect of an accessible website is the media player we're using. And I'll be talking a little bit about WCAG 2.1 contrasted with 2.0, which was part of my accessibility journey for making the podcast accessible. Do note, it's not an in-depth code review. This is not what this is about. There's so many things to consider and talk about. So I'm not going to go into in-depth about code. And I'm certainly not going to review things that most people should be comfortable with in terms of accessibility when we're looking at the WCAG 2.0 success criteria. So accessibility, A11Y, for those of you that don't know what it is, it means accessibility. There's been a lot of debate about the fact that this shortcut, this hashtag is not really accessible, but it's taken ground and it's known more and more. And how did it become A11Y instead of accessibility? Is because it's a numeronym. A word that I'm always tripping on. So basically we're looking at the first letter of the word and the last letter of the word, and we count the number of letters in between. There's 11 letters in between the A and the Y. So we have A11Y for accessibility. Just something that a lot of people actually don't know where it comes from. So there you go. The first thing, transcripts. Obviously, podcasts are a audio format, so for a lot of people that can't hear the audio or access the audio for whatever reason, we should provide transcripts, and I'm going to focus on transcript here. There was a study that was done for the show This American Life from NPR. They went and transcribed about 500 of their episodes, and after they did that, they realized they had a lot of inbound traffic coming through, whether it was actual unique visitors or search traffic coming through. They realized that over 7% of the unique visitors viewed at least one transcript when they were looking at the site. So that's 7% of your traffic is quite considerable. There were over 4% of new traffic coming through, and over 6.6% of increased search traffic coming through. So that's also quite interesting. And they had nearly 4% of inbound links that started appearing after they did this transcript. So in this day and age of trying to get information and more traffic and more visitors, I think just in and of itself, these numbers for me are really interesting and a good argument to provide transcripts. But there's more than that. Beyond making the content accessible for people with disabilities, you end up with all your content indexed, searchable. So if you have to refer to an old episode, you have it right there, easy to find. It's more easily translated. So if you have your podcast that it's in English, and you have people coming to your site from France or Japan or anywhere else, they can run your content through Google Translate or other translating machines, and that will be easier for them to access. More people can access your content. There's a lot of people that love to listen to your podcast or access that, but maybe they're in an open plan office, or they're on a bus, or there may be any number of reasons that that it's difficult for them to access the audio. We still have people that have slow connections. We're not all blessed with gigabit internet, and we don't always have all you can with eat data either. So there's a whole lot of reasons that people will benefit from your transcripts, including you. So what's a transcript? A transcript is basically taking anything that's spoken and translating that into the written word. And there's a few things you need to keep in mind when you're looking at doing transcripts. Typically, when you purchase transcription services, you're going to be asked, you want timestamps. And timestamps typically are more expensive to get, but if you are implementing synchronized transcripts, that's actually mission critical. And I'll talk a little bit more about synchronized transcripts later on. You can get the speaker's name included in the transcript, and if you have more than one speaker, it's really crucial to actually know who is saying what. And depending on transcription services, you might have that done for free if there's no more than 4 speakers or something like that. You'll also be asked if you want your transcript to be verbatim, and that means it includes everything, including the ums or the or all these vocal tics that might be present in the speakers. And typically that makes it really harder to read. I think the verbatim transcripts are more important when you're starting to look at legal transcription or medical transcription, which is obviously not the realm where we're moving in when we're talking about podcasts. So do yourself a favor, and when you order a transcript, order the clean, or sometimes referred to as clean verbatim, which really includes only the words that are important, none of the text. It makes it so much easier to read. There's 3 main types of transcription you can look at. 2 of them are human transcriptions, and the other one would be machine transcription. The human transcription, typically either you do the thing, you do the transcript, and that can be quite time consuming. It's cheap if you don't value your time, but it can take a while, especially when you're not used to it. On the other hand, you know the content better, so you're going to be more accurate into what is being said. I'm using human transcription services. It's costing me about $1 US per minute of audio. So it's not cheap, but it's also not super expensive. You have to shop around. I'm not going to recommend any specific transcription service, but they're out there, and some of them are doing a really good job. Generally accurate between 97 and 99%. But if you are doing a technical show, the accuracy goes down. So it's good to build a glossary of words that you're using in the podcast. So that's going to help the transcription service to actually be more accurate. Now, a lot of people are wanting to use machine transcription or automated transcription, and it's not a bad thing. Some people say it's better to have a machine transcription that's accurate to maybe 80% than no transcription at all. And in some way, I find that argument difficult to argue against, but at the same time, I'm not entirely convinced. The benefit of the machine transcription, however, is it's going to cost you about 10 cents per minute of audio. So that can be a good approach to starting your transcription. So you get it transcribed cheaply with machine transcription, and then you go back and you fill in the blank where it's not quite as accurate as you would want. Because if we're looking at machine transcription and we're thinking, better a poor transcript than no transcript for your podcast. And we're thinking, okay, this sentence has 10 words, and we were looking at about 80% accuracy. So what happens if you're missing the first word and a word in the middle, then the sentence read, a poor transcript than no for your podcast. Suddenly it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Or you can miss other words in the sentence. So better a transcript than transcript for your podcast. Suddenly we've dropped poor and no. So this gives you a feel for what happens when you have only 80% accuracy. It's you can get a gist maybe, but you will be missing the crucial points of the whole thing. So if you do rely on machine transcription, I strongly urge you to actually go back and run through the transcript while you're listening to your show and fill in the blank and correct the text as it goes. One of the things I've seen happen a lot is when the show has a transcript, suddenly they put it on a different page, and the link to the transcript is often hard to find. And I'm going to suggest to you that to get the benefit of search engine friendliness and of all these people being able to benefit from the transcript needs to be easy to find. Ideally, it's part of the podcast episode page. If you look at my website for the podcast, all the episodes have the player at the top of the page, and right below that, the transcript is available, and it's easy to find. And the text of the transcript is then associated with the show, and it's much better on several respects. Now, please don't provide the transcript as a downloadable document, not a PDF, not a Word doc, not a text file. Just put it into your page. It's not going to harm anything. It's, that's what the web is for, is to present documents. So put it there and avoid putting it on a separate page. I think you will have a lot more people enjoying the transcript if it's on the same page. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't say is they don't say on the show that they have a transcript, and so that's something that pays to do. At the start you can say there's a transcript available and where to find it. So if someone is looking for that and they're accessing the podcast through maybe their podcast player of choice, they'll know that there's a transcript available and it's easy to find. You might want to state that way and when you talk about show notes or anything else, and ideally at the start of the show, so people actually know it's right there when the show begins, and they don't actually you make it front and center, not as an afterthought. I think that's a good idea. So that was transcripts, a fairly quick overview. We could probably talk more about it, but let's look a little bit about website, because of course, once you have a transcript, you have to have a website for your show, and there's a lot of different flavors of podcast hosting and solutions. I was looking for the Accessibility Rules podcast to have something that I could make accessible relatively easily and that I would have actual control over. So I chose the WordPress platform, which I've known for a while, so it wasn't too difficult to make work for me. And then I went in search of the right plugin. There's a lot of plugins out there for podcasting, and some of them you have less control over rather than more. I chose the Seriously Simple Podcasting plugin because the code is open and I was able to go in and do the modifications I needed. Again, mostly from an accessibility point of view. Now, we know that for a website to be accessible, we have to think about the usual suspects. We have to make sure that the site works for keyboard users, whether they're sighted or not. So being able to tab forward and backwards and then activate all the interactive elements with the enter key, the space bar, We want to make sure the site works for screen reader users. We want to make sure that it works for visitors with low vision, so that includes contrast issues. So there's a whole list of things, and I think that the majority of people that are attending this webinar actually know about basic accessibility. So I'm not going to go in depth about that. In fact, I'm going to leave it out there that if you want an accessible website, look at WCAG 2.0 to get you started if you don't know how to do that. So one of the things I did when I did my website was in early January that I went live with the website, and I looked at WCAG 2.0 level AA compliance. So I worked on that, and then I was asked by someone on the WCAG 2.1 committee that they really wanted to have my site as an implementation site before making the guidelines be accepted. So I foolishly maybe agreed to that, and then delved into the guidelines to see what would apply to my site, what I needed to worry about, and what did not apply. And that was quite an interesting learning experience for me, because obviously I've been doing accessibility for a long time, but I was not at that time familiar with 2.1. But I'll get back to 2.1 in a little bit with the specific criteria that I was looking at. If you're looking at building a website like I did on WordPress, you have to start with the right theme. Make sure it's accessibility ready, whatever that actually means, because you have a lot of themes on the marketplace that say they're accessibility ready but aren't exactly ready. But it's a good start. And then you may want to look at Joe Dawson's most excellent plugin called WP Accessibility, which implements a lot of accessibility for themes that may not be fully accessible. And then you may need to do additional custom work. And that included, for me, making 2.1 work. A lot of things in 2.1 did not apply to me. And the other aspect is that I was not aiming for a AAA level accessibility. So that also let go a few aspects. Some things were unclear. One of the new success criteria, identify input purpose, that's 1.3.5. Basically is now understood as make sure that your form input fields have autocomplete in it. But it wasn't clear when I was working on it that was it. And I sought guidance to with the people that were actually writing the standard, and there were some discrepancies in what they were saying, so that can actually cause issues for you if you're not really familiar with accessibility. But hopefully the new technical documents to help you along are going to help. And I should plug in the fact that Nobility has been putting one new blog post about each of the 2.1 success criteria every week, and we do cover in depth about what each means and how that's going to impact on you if you look at 2.1. So some of the specific things I implemented when I was looking at making my podcast site. 1.3.4 orientation. So basically, it needed to work in both sides of landscape and portrait, and that typically is important for people that will have their devices often mounted on, for example, a wheelchair. So they use their phone or their iPad permanently mounted in one orientation. And if your website requires you to be in one direction rather than the other, it can cause issues. So for me, orientation worked a little bit with the reflow aspect, 1.4.10, basically being able to change font size and element being placed where they need to be placed. So that was some work I had to do in the theme and making sure that worked. 1.3.5, as I said, identify input purpose. That was to do around making sure the forms, in my case particularly the contact form, had the autocomplete field associated to that when the right field were used. So the name, the email, the address, the phone number, all that can be used with autocomplete. I ended up removing the contact form for a technical reason. I actually could not make my contact form system error messaging actually work. I could not programmatically associate the error message with the erroneous field, and that's something I'm working on when I have spare time, which I haven't had very much lately, but it's something for you to consider, that sometimes you might be able to make a form work with some of the new success criteria, but if they're not working across the board, even with the old success criteria, then there's no real point working on the new ones. Other elements that were tripping me were 1.4.11, which is non-text contrast. So basically that's the contrast on elements that are not necessarily text. Logos are a good example of that, and some images that are critical to the understanding on the page. I was loading third-party content, namely Patreon, which is a platform that's not accessible, but that's a discussion for another day. So I had to go and adjust contrast on some of the elements to make it work. 1.4.12 text spacing. So the theme I had selected needed a little bit more space around line heights and kerning and that kind of stuff. So had to move around that. And finally, 2.4.12, which is label and name. I was using a PayPal donate button that I had to implement the label a little bit differently than the code that they were giving when you're exporting the code out of PayPal. So I had to play a little bit with that. Nothing major, and I think it's within the reach of pretty much everyone who understands coding a little bit. But you have to do a little bit of thinking, and you might have to play around a little bit before you're reaching a point where you're at. And I'd like to point out something that I always tell people, that it's better to implement a little accessibility and keep implementing as you go rather than hold back until you're done, because just like any website, you're never really done. There's always going to be things to improve and things to implement. So don't wait until you're quote unquote done to make it happen. So the last aspect I want to cover about podcast accessibility is the player that you provide on your site. And I had an issue with the default player that was coming with simply seriously simple podcasting. And it was a similar issue that was found with a lot of the podcasting plugin, whether you're talking about Podbean or LibSync or a whole lot of them. they're using players that are somewhat accessible, but maybe not completely. Seriously Simple Podcasting was using the JW player, which actually worked with keyboard, but there was no way to actually create visible focus on the element, at least not within the implementation when it was on WordPress with the different layers of CSS. So making it work was really difficult. So you could navigate the player with the keyboard, but you could not actually see which element was active, which makes it basically not unusable, but very difficult to use for sighted keyboard users. And under the hood, they were using some really weird area attributes and values, which in my test with VoiceOver and NVDA meant that there were some things that were unexpected. And while it wasn't major blockers, you could work around that. It also did not create a friendly experience. And for me, accessibility really is about being friendly and making it easy for people. So I did some research and I tried a few player, and I ended up going with Able Player, which incidentally is the player that has been used on the W3C website. So it's pretty good in many respects. Some of the things that I really like about Able Player is that it allows you to add timed transcripts. So earlier I was talking about when you purchase Transcription, you can get timed transcript and they put timestamp through. So when you have these timed transcript and you use Able Player, you can actually get an area on your site that will be timed. So as the podcast is playing, the transcript is moving along with the right cadence, and it's associated that way. I did not implement that because I thought it might create some other issues, and it also doesn't allow people to scan the transcript really quickly if they want to just get a feel for the show or just get to a specific part of the transcript. But it is a popular option. The other aspect is that if you're doing video podcast, well, I guess vlogs more than podcast, you can also provide an audio description file with Able Player. So that associate the audio description to the video file, and you're going to be able to have that associated, which a lot of the players out there, you would have to jump through massive hoops to make happen. Now, Able Player is a really solid thing, but it's also not designed necessarily for WordPress. And I thought, okay, am I gonna spend time making it work in WordPress, or is there a plugin? And lo and behold, there was a plugin. It's older, but it's it's secure, so I'm not too worried about that. I'm keeping an eye on security and updates, but I was able to find a plugin that allowed me to fairly straightforward use Able Player in the site. I had, of course, to go in and use shortcodes in the podcast plugin to remove the default player and be able to actually use the Able Player. So there's a few hoops to jump through, and that's probably something you want to plan for when you start building your site, instead of building it and seeing as you go, which was maybe a mistake I made. But while it was a bit of a mistake on the front end, I ended up learning so much and actually having fun doing it. People tell me, Nick, accessibility is such a chore. And I say, you're a coder, right? And they say, yeah. And I say, you like a coding challenge, right? And they say, yeah. So think about accessibility as a coding challenge. And that for me was a little bit the case. It was a coding challenge, a strategy and implementation challenge. So, as I said, even with the plugin, I needed to make it work with Seriously Simple Podcast plugin, and I did so. A recap quickly, and then I'll be taking questions. We'll have about 20 minutes for discussion and questions. So find a platform for your podcast, and that might take you some time because you will have to test the different platforms. There's a lot of platforms out there, but most of them are not really accessibility friendly or not really easily modifiable. So make your platform accessible. Ensure your media player is fully accessible. Provide transcripts and make the transcripts easy to find. So that is really the end of the slides, and hopefully we open up discussions and questions.
For those of you who do have questions, type them up here in the chat. The way that the Zoom webinars work is that they don't allow anybody to talk except for the presenters, which I guess is by design and okay, as opposed to having 55 people talking at once. But it definitely does hinder some interaction. So if you have any questions, definitely put them through here. Nic, do you have any favorites in terms of people to do the transcript over others? I mean, I know you mentioned that a bit. There's a couple of services out there, and we've used a bunch. We're using for our live, for the live webinar here right now, we're using ACS captions. I know you've done some research on that.
Yeah, I did do quite a bit of research on best transcription service out there. For a while, I was using Rev, rev.com, and they're good, they're quick, they're relatively accurate, but I have found that a lot of the time I did not get all that accurate things. Even when I was providing glossaries, sometimes they were making mistakes, even my name. However, when you have high volume, they provide an API, so that's good. Currently, I'm using an independent transcriber, which is also quick and much more accurate. And because she's independent, she's actually able to tell me, hey, Nic, there's something wrong with your audio in this particular episode, or that kind of feedback, which for me is really really important. And so that's Kath Pope, but anyone who wants the details, I'm happy to provide contact details after the show. If you're looking at cheaper machine translation, there's Temi or Temi, Temi. They're pretty much the best out there, and they're coming up with an API, so you can hook up your system if you have if you have high volume as well. So there's yeah,
the API thing is kind of interesting because we had a client who was doing a high volume of videos and stuff like that on their website, and the ability to sort of shoot off that file for transcription and then getting it back was pretty neat from the API side of things. But also that's a pretty competitive space, right? I mean, a lot of services out there, I mean, that's why you get it so cheap, because it's a really competitive space. I think a lot of people use Mechanical Turk for some of those things, and they just send them out to Turk workers, and that's why there's a bit of a increased charge to get it, to get the accuracy and stuff like that, like you were mentioning. But it's totally worth it. It's totally worth it to spend the extra money to get the increased accuracy.
Yeah.
So, anybody else having any questions?
So I see a lot of questions coming through about my contact details, but I think that's been given by Michael. I see a question about use of sign language for deaf people who cannot read or write. Yeah, you know, this is something that I struggled with. Do I provide that or not? And I think it's fantastic if you are in a position to be able to provide it. From a podcast accessibility in general, I think you're going to find issues with making that happen. So
Yeah.
I struggle a lot with podcasts to tell them, hey, you know, you need to be accessible. You need to provide a transcript. And I'm getting a lot of pushback on that. So I can't really see myself going back to them and say, hey, you know, great, you provided a transcript. It's fantastic. Now, please provide a video and sign language, which is the equivalent of your transcripts, so people who are deaf and can't read will be able to understand that. I think that would really be pushing the envelope a lot, to the point that people would actually just wash their hands off it and not want to touch accessibility. That said, if you're able to provide that, by all means do it. And it's certainly, you know, more accessibility is better than less, absolutely. Some of the pitfalls I would look at is make sure that the sign language you're using is actually relevant to the language of your podcast. So if you're using more, your guests are more American, use ASL. But if your guests are more in Canada or in the Australia or in the UK, you're going to have to pick up the right flavor of sign language, and you're going to have to see how you can integrate the sign language with the podcast audio episode. And I think it would get quite tricky technically, but worth doing if you can.
Are you aware of any services that do that? Like, I know, you know, with the accessibility boot camps that I do, I have one coming up in November in San Francisco, and I've gotten some contacts out there that I've dealt with through some online directories for sign language interpreters to do it in person.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is there a service that would do that? Let's say here on this Zoom, you know, or something like that. Is it possible to have a sign language interpreter do it live the way we have ACS doing the captioning?
There's a couple aspects to that. The first thing is, I think finding an interpreter that would be willing to do it would be relatively mundane. It's just a question of finding the right person and having the budget for it. Last time I looked for interpreters in the United States, it was about $40 per hour for interpreting, and I think it's gone up since.
Yeah.
So in the context of doing a podcast, I think interpreters would be very happy to probably go on even Skype and do a Skype video, and then you can record the screen, and then you can use that to edit your video file. So that's relatively simple. For live podcast or live webinar like we're doing now, I think the barrier to use here becomes the platform that you use, and how do you ensure that you're able to display the sign language live in a little vignette in a corner of the screen. I don't know that Zoom does that, and I don't know any other platform that does that. But if somebody does, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. Like you were saying, that the per hour rate for someone who to come, you know, someone has to come on site and travel to your location, you know, for like an event, you know, like a meetup, or that does get kind of pricey. I mean, you know, $40 an hour, not a big deal when it's 1 hour, like a webinar or something like that. $40 an hour when they're there all day is kind of pricey. But I can't imagine. I mean, I imagine there's probably got to be a market opportunity somewhere for somebody who could do it virtually like this. But yeah, I don't know of any. That would be great to hear about, though. So does anybody else have any questions? So while we're waiting for any more questions to come up, I'm going to mention that the next one of these is in November as well. Michael, do you have the exact date in front of you, or I can log on to Zoom and take a look at that. Now, when everybody registered for this Zoom, it actually for the webinar, it actually did, for whatever reason, the way Zoom does it, it registers you for every webinar that you have in the schedule. So for us, you're kind of already registered for all the rest. Now, that doesn't mean you have to attend, and you can actually unregister if you'd like. But the next one is going to be for
it's going to be on November 7th.
November 7th. Awesome. Okay.
And Gerard Cohen will be our presenter.
Gerard Cohen, another guy I know rather well. He's a developer over at Wells Fargo, and he's going to be talking about custom form elements, and specifically, I think he's talking specific about the select element. Now, again, keeping in mind that technically is about deeply technical things. What I really like about this, and I'm not going to give any spoilers for Gerard's talk, but one of my own personal pet peeves is the fact that a lot of developers out there will create custom form elements specifically so that they can style them, right? So graphic designers come up with some sort of visual treatment that they want to have forms adhere to, and next thing you know, the browser doesn't support styling them accordingly. So as a consequence, of course, developers will come up with custom form elements, and God only knows what they're actually going to look like. But it's usually radio buttons and checkboxes and select elements that they do it with, because styling regular plain text inputs is kind of easy. And a select element, I mean, everybody has select elements on their forms, and the mechanisms of interacting with a select element via the keyboard and getting the necessary feedback to the user is non-trivial. And I give an example of this in a talk that I give that's called "What is this thing and what does it do?" And it's about how we have to have some level of predictability to the user interface so that the user understands how to use it. And I use a select element as an example. So what's great about this is Gerard Cohen's going to give us a deep dive in that stuff, and I think he's going to give us a pretty awesome idea for how to make sure the select elements are accessible. So that's really cool. So we're going to button this up here. There is one other question.
Yeah, just a question about which website do I know that use accessible podcasts? There's a few of them, but they're a little bit difficult to find. I started a list on podcast-accessibility.com, and I'm sending that to the chat, so if anyone wants that. Whoops, I sent that only to the transcriber. So so yeah, that's difficult to know, because there's no centralized list anywhere. But every time I come across a podcast that's accessible, I put it on the list, and that's on GitHub. So if you come across them, I invite you to add yours to the list, because it's interesting. TEDx videos, they have captions, and I think they're timed, and they have transcripts. So it's not a bad side at all from an accessibility perspective. Could be better, but it's pretty good.
Cool.
So
now, so just for anyone else, as we're buttoning up, if you would like to give a talk here on the technically webinars, propose something. Give us a shout on any idea that you have that you'd like to share, a good technical deep dive on. PJ mentioned a topic she'd like to hear about on an upcoming topic, and that is best practices for making error messages accessible. So if anybody wants to do a talk on that, definitely give us a shout. Until then, I want to thank all of you for coming, and I also want to thank Nick for giving us our first talk, and my colleague Michael for setting all this up, because God knows I'm too disorganized to get anything like this started. And also want to thank ACS Captions for the captioning. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you in November. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.